Hi there, my name's Mark Fielding. I'm a psychotherapist and relationship counsellor. I'm a member of the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy and an accredited registrant of the National Counselling Society. I've been in private practice for just over 14 years and I've worked with highly sensitive people throughout this time.
What is a highly sensitive person?
A highly sensitive person, or in shorthand HSP, is a personality trait which research suggests is shared by 15 to 20% of the population. It's not really been in the public domain for a long time, although over the last few years it has come a little bit more into prominence. There's an American psychologist called Elaine, Aron, who's written some excellent books around this personality trait, and I'd just like to credit her work here.
What does high sensitivity look like in a person?
It really depends on the individual. There are lots and lots of traits within the high sensitivity condition. Every single person that's highly sensitive will not demonstrate all of these traits, but overall it can be characterised by a sense of deep processing. Highly sensitive people process information mentally in a really, really deep, thorough way. This can make them slightly cautious, and can create situations where they tend to think a lot before making decisions, certainly in terms of thinking a lot before making life changes. It's also often marked by a real sensitivity to environmental conditions. Highly sensitive people, HSPs, are often incredibly sensitive to things like loud noises, strong smells, and just being in crowds, being on the tube. Many highly sensitive people find it really, really difficult to be on the tube. They find all of the sensory stimuli really, really overwhelming.
Is it a mental disorder?
It's definitely not a mental disorder, although highly sensitive people in society have often grown up in an environment where parents, people at school, caregivers have told them, you're too sensitive, you're shy, you need to be stronger. So growing up in this environment and having their sensitivity negatively described can have a real effect on highly sensitive people. And I would say, 90% of the highly sensitive people that I've seen over the years, have developed anxiety about their trait. They end up thinking there's something wrong with me. Which is absolutely wrong. Though, as with any personality trait, there are lots of positives and there are some negatives, which we'll come to at the end of the video.
Are there any other traits that highly sensitive people might demonstrate?
Highly sensitive people have a really deep sense of empathy. Some research out there is suggesting that highly sensitive people have more mirror neurons. Simplistically, mirror neurons are the parts of the brain that activate when we see perhaps someone else suffer. So if we're watching an image of someone suffering on TV, and there's so many images of that to see, that we will feel the same emotion. So highly sensitive people, as a rule, find it really, really difficult to watch scenes of suffering, violent films, and are deeply, deeply affected by them.
You mentioned crowds. Why are highly sensitive people affected by crowds?
Well, highly sensitive people are generally really affected by being in crowds and even large groups of people. Being in big crowds like at a pop concert or something like that, or a festival, it's generally the amount of stimuli. So there's lots of people, there's lots of noise, possibly lots of lights, loud noise. And so highly sensitive people, with this deep processing, find these situations incredibly difficult because they process things so deeply. When there's so much environmental stimuli, it becomes just overwhelming. They can't process it all. But also a character trait of highly sensitive people in perhaps smaller groups is because of this capacity for empathy. If they sit in a group and say everyone's angry in the group, with I think someone that doesn't have the high sensitivity trait, they'll notice the anger, but they remain possibly fairly unaffected by it. but a highly sensitive person is almost like someone that has no skin. So if they sit in a group with lots of angry people, they will feel this anger extremely deeply. It will go into the core of their being. This is true with negative emotions, but looking at it positively, this can also be true of positive emotions. If a highly sensitive person sits in a group of really joyful people, they will also suck that joy in. But this capacity for empathy means that when they're in groups, they're very, very affected by the people in them. And also, even in smaller groups, even in one-to-one, if a highly sensitive person is with a couple of people, they'll be acutely aware of the emotional states of the other people. They really pick these things up. They have almost like a superpower in picking up the personality, the feelings of the other people. And again, this can be positive and this can be negative. And it also ties into the deep processing, because they'll process all of this extremely deeply.
What are the positive aspects of being a highly sensitive person?
Well, the positive aspects of being a highly sensitive person are, well, in terms of empathy, highly sensitive people can be incredibly good friends. They really connect with and understand the suffering of others. So they can be really, really fantastic friends. And also the idea of having no skin, of being really affected by environment. I've talked about all of the negative aspects, and in society there are a lot of potential situations where it can be negative. However, with highly sensitive people, if they're in a really beautiful environment, say walking through a forest, this fact that they have almost no skin and the environment kind of goes into them really deeply means that they can connect with nature in a really, really wonderful way. They can connect with joy in a really, really wonderful way. They can connect with others' positive experiences also in a really, really wonderful way. And the deep processing can be really, really helpful in terms of understanding others, understanding their environment. Often highly sensitive people have a real love of learning. They just want to understand everything. So I think going forwards with highly sensitive people, I think it's all about increasing the life situations where the positive aspects of the trait come into operation, and being aware of when they can be negatively affected and putting in some coping strategies in order to deal with that.
What are the potential difficulties of being a highly sensitive person?
Well, society is really stimulating. Depending on where you are and where you live, certainly in towns, there is so much stimulation, from everywhere. There's noise, there's smells, there's sound. TV can be really stimulating. The company of others can be really overstimulating. So I think highly sensitive people need to accept the fact that they have this trait, and I think the acceptance is key. So if they are in a situation and they become overwhelmed, that they don't end up running potentially a historical script which says there's something wrong with you, you should be different, why are you not like the other people, why are you not enjoying yourself like they are. I think that's really, really key, and often those scripts have been run by highly sensitive people for years. So I think the acceptance is really important. But I think in terms of overwhelm, I think highly sensitive people need to develop coping strategies for overwhelm. So if they're in a situation, say they're in a crowded staff room at work, for instance, and they check in and they feel that they're becoming overstimulated, there's some anxiety going on, then I think they have to allow themselves to just take themselves out of the situation for a few minutes. Even if that involves going outside, being outside, really good for a highly sensitive person. Or, even if they're in an office, going and sitting in the loo for 5 minutes and just doing some deep breathing, just calming down, just de-escalating the overwhelm. And I think highly sensitive people need to have coping strategies in place to deal with things that perhaps they come across in the moment without realising. But I think also in terms of mental health scaffolding, I urge highly sensitive people to have a meditation practice. They can do that, every day. Doesn't take much to start. You can do 10 minutes a day. And the more this meditation practice gets developed, the more they can use it in the moment. So if they're overstimulated, they can just close their eyes, focus on their breath, de-escalate. I think it's all about the rebooting. Highly sensitive people, in a similar way to introverts, need a lot of downtime. So if they've gone into a situation where potentially they're going to be really overstimulated, time on their own afterwards I think is really important. Just time, just chilling out, just de-escalating, calming down their nervous system, before perhaps they go off into another potentially overstimulating environment.
Is it just seen in introverts?
It's definitely not just seen in introverts. Many extroverts can also be highly sensitive people, or HSPs. Paradoxically, some HSPs have an associated trait called high sensation seeking, and these HSPs, highly sensitive people, will seek out really exhilarating situations, bungee jumping, skydiving, because to fulfill this trait. But it is incredibly difficult for these HSPs because there's a really delicate balance between being overstimulated and fulfilling the high sensation seeking trait. This is in a smaller percentage of highly sensitive people, and it warrants a video of its own, so I will return to this in a further video.
What are the potential negative mental health effects of being a highly sensitive person in modern society?
Well, modern society is extremely stimulating for everyone and extremely overstimulating potentially for highly sensitive people. Highly sensitive people can often come to therapy experiencing anxiety, low self-esteem, and sometimes depression, although this is not true of all highly sensitive people. In terms of low self-esteem, highly sensitive people have often been told from an early age they're shy, too cautious, too sensitive, which has had a negative effect on their self-esteem. As they get older, they play these scripts themselves when they're in situations where they're becoming overstimulated and others are doing just fine. They think there's something wrong with them, they compare themselves unfavourably to others, and this can create low self-esteem and depression. In terms of anxiety, I think highly sensitive people that don't understand their trait, don't understand the need to reboot and get back their energy after being really stimulated, can force themselves to have lives where they're stimulated, overstimulated, day after day, perhaps doing the wrong jobs, perhaps being in the wrong situations. And I think over time, this overstimulation can lead to extreme anxiety, and often highly sensitive people can present to therapy being extremely anxious. I think for me as a therapist, I think the key is acceptance and understanding of the trait, and then consciously creating a life where the positive effects of the trait are experienced more often than the negative ones.
Is there an evolutionary aspect to being a highly sensitive person?
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating. There absolutely is. I mean, again, I'll quote Elaine, Aron. She's done some really fantastic research into HSPs. This trait has been found in lots of different animals and insects, everything from fruit flies to deer. I mean, in terms of deer, imagine the scene, the deer are kind of in a forest and all of the deer are kind of eating, and there's a noise, a distant noise, which most of the deer don't hear. The highly sensitive deer will be the one that perks up his ears and alerts the group to the noise. And this is perfect high sensitivity. And this deer will probably live longer, but probably won't end up eating as much as the other deer. But high sensitivity, there's an evolutionary advantage, which is why 15 to 20% of the population have it. So there are lots and lots of potential benefits, and it's seen throughout nature.
Your final message for highly sensitive people?
I would say acceptance of the trait and understanding of what works and what doesn't is key to creating a fantastic life as a highly sensitive person. In terms of the framing, I think considering it your superpower and looking at all the positive aspects, like the capacity for empathy with others, is a really beautiful thing. And also the having no skin and in environments, use it. Go to forests, go to beautiful environments, and suck in all those good feelings that those environments create for you. And also in terms of interpersonal relations and relationships, your capacity for empathy and understanding of others is really, really key in creating really, really fantastic and wonderful relationships. And if I look at highly sensitive people in almost a psychospiritual way, I would leave by asking the question, does the planet need highly sensitive people at this time? Or does it need people that are oblivious to what's going on? I would say that highly sensitive people are needed by society and by the planet more and more every day. So value and appreciate your trait.